Yeah, so one of the checking code is this. Then let me generate another one. You can all read this, right? Four nine four seven three. Yeah, so check in using one of these. Alright class, so here is the guideline for you to attend online lectures if you need to. So what we'll do from this lecture onward is that we'll do it in hybrid zone. So I will log into BB Collaborate. There are some students who have not joined us yet. So that's for them actually. But ideally we should do all the classes physically. But since we are doing, I will keep the recording there for you. So here you'll have the guideline of how to do it. Yeah. Besides this, I've also uploaded the 2 books that I promised last week. So whichever you feel like more easier for you, you can use them. There are like hundreds of books on this topic. Personally, for me, I like this one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so actually this is how you can do it. Go to BB Collaborate and then just join the course room. Alright, so before we start our class today, can I get a confirmation from our online audience? Can you hear and see me clearly? That's perfect. Thank you so much, Jisan. Thank you so much, Yayan. Alright. So what you need to do every week is to ask me to hit record button because I'm very forgetful. Yeah? Right, now this is being recorded. What I will do is share my screen. I'm so sorry about the other screen. Dr. Allen is looking into it, and facilities is probably on the way to fix this. In the meantime, if you can see from there, or the slides are there on eLearn as well, so feel free to just download them on your screens, and I'll try to go slowly. Yeah? Alright, so welcome everyone to our lecture number 2 for the course Introduction to Organic Chemistry, aka Basic Biochemistry. So in today's lecture, what we will cover is classification of organic compounds. That will be our first topic. And then the second topic, which we will start today, is alkane. So So before we get into the details of this topic, let's take probably 7 minutes, if that's okay, and it can be more as well, depending on the discussion that we will going to have. So these 7 to 10 minutes I want to reserve in every lecture for discussion on previous lecture. So by any chance, do you have any questions from the previous lecture? Now would be the perfect time to raise your hand and we'll go about them. Right? So any questions, please? Right, so how about someone of you tell me that if you did have a chance to go through the previous lecture after the class or not? You can raise your hand. Did you check out the slides again after the class for previous lecture or no? I see a lot of head nodding. Is there anyone who didn't have a chance to go through the slides? That would be my favorite student for today. Perfect. Thank you so much. I like the honesty. Anyone else? Right, you probably will not have the time all the time, right? You might be busy in other things. So you can freely say yes or say no whenever I ask this type of question. So this gives me an opportunity to probably extend the break a little bit so that everyone is coming together on the speed of the class, yeah? So what we covered in last week, probably I can bring my slides from previous lecture as well, okay? In the meantime, if you have noted any questions, please go ahead. While I pull off the slides from previous week. Right, so first lecture was mainly about introduction and overview, right? There were many things from basic general chemistry that we covered last week, right? For example, the history, and then the elements. We looked at some of the examples of important organic compounds. Remember? Well, the real stuff started from here, where we looked at the empirical structure of atom, because we will be dealing with carbon as the most important element in organic compounds and most important atom in organic compounds. So we looked at atomic structure, right? Isotopes, just the definition of them. Electronic configuration was a topic where a lot of heads spun last week, right? So do you remember the electronic configuration? What was that about? Do you have any questions about Hund's rule and off-bus rule? No? Right, so let me ask you a question maybe. So what comes after 2p orbital in terms of energy? 3s, right? So some of you do have an idea about that, but what about some of you who don't? So this information would be really important. At least the first 5-10 orbitals you must memorize, so that at least carbon you would be able to fill in electrons in all the orbitals in there. Okay? So I am emphasizing this again, at least like 10 first orbitals in the sequence you must memorize. That would be really key for your success in a lot of things in this course. Yeah? Right, so we had one question earlier, I can't remember where was it, but then one student asked me that for carbon, for example, right? Yes, here. So we have for carbon, the configuration is written like this: 1s2, 2s2, 2px1, and 2py1. So can we write 2p2 simply and not break down the P into X and Y and Z, and then write 1, 1 on each. So do you understand the question? That the student asked that why do we actually need to write P like this? That 2px1 and 2py1. And if we write 2p2 just like any other example, would that be okay? So what do you think? Would that be okay, or do we need to write like this all the time? That would be fine. Perfect. Yes. So we can generally write 2p2 or 2p3 or 4 or 5, just like that. So this is just the detailed description of within p orbital how the electrons are filled. And why we are splitting them in x and y? Because that's what is stated by Wundt's rule. That electrons would like to be alone first, and later if there's more electron, then you can pair them up in the same suborbital. So p orbital has 3 suborbitals, px, py, and pz, and each of them can take 3 electrons. So that's what you see here, right? Then for nitrogen, we have 1, 1, 1 first, and then only for oxygen we have 2. Right? Then for next we have another 2. Then for next we have like complete fill of p orbital. This makes sense, right? Right, then we looked at the definition of bonding and electronegativity, just some boring stuff, right? Lewis' structure was quite important. Any question about this? Like how do we simply draw the structure of any given compound? The basic structure we can do by using Lewis principles, right? These are the Lewis principles of drawing the structure. Then we looked at many examples. Then we took it to a next notch, which was other type of structures like condensed form or the stick model. Remember, right? How to calculate formal charges. This is quite important for your exam as well. You might see questions in your exam, especially in the MCQ section, about formal charges calculation. So just remember this equation, and then you're good to go. Correct? What else we did? This is important as well. You can from one slide know that how many bonds each of these elements make, because these are nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and halogen. Besides boron, the other elements are quite important in most of the other organic compounds. Right? And then came the resonance form, which some of you might not be familiar with before, right? Oh, perfect. What to do? Okay. Thank you so much. Right, perfect. So how can we transform one resonance form into the other resonance form? That might be a very valid question from previous lecture. So we can actually do that by moving electrons using these curly arrows, right? We will do a whole different lecture about this thing. I think lecture 4 or 5. That would be about these movement of electrons. We call this drawing the mechanism of a reaction. But in this case, we are not drawing the mechanism. Instead, we are just converting one resonance form into the other resonance form. But the point is that electrons can move from one atom to the other atom depending on the drive of electrons or the deficiency of electrons on the neighboring or next to the neighboring atoms. Yeah? Yeah, then these rules are super important for you to decide on which of the resonance structure is a major contributor to the actual structure, and then which would be a minor contributor. Correct? Then we looked at a few examples of these. And then this is all about the other types of structures. Right? At the end, we looked at isomerism, and we only looked at a few examples because we don't need to go into that depth yet. Especially the stereoisomers, we have a separate chapter for stereoisomers. So we'll cover it there, but to introduce, yes, this is how the definition goes. And then we looked at some of the examples. For example, cis-trans isomers. Those are examples of geometrical isomers. And then the functional group isomers or constitutional isomers, we looked at their examples in the previous slides. Yeah? That's about it. So yeah, questions. Now we have only 2 minutes. Yes?
Why is it only with double bond? Is like the orientation or something stuck?
It's not. Double bond is just one example of the compounds which can have geometrical isomers. Stereoisomers is a different class of isomers which talks about the orientation of compounds. So geometric isomers are for double bond, while single bonds can also have stereoisomers, as we will see in other examples. But yeah, good question. So stereoisomers are not specific about carbon-carbon double bonds only. There are other examples as well where you will see many types of stereoisomers. But geometric isomers are one type of the stereoisomer which are taken here as a representative example, and those almost always have something to do with carbon-carbon double bond. Right? Final call for questions. Do we have some questions from the online class? Oh, we have, I think. Can I have the attendance score for today's class? Wins, you can. I will mark you in, so you don't have to worry about it. Isabel, can we use different icons for the respective valence electrons of different elements in the Lewis structure, dot and cross? Well, you can, yes. A lot of text utilizes this representation as well, so by all means. Right, so online attendees, you don't need to worry about your attendance because I will be able to see your attendance from here, and then I can mark you in myself. Okay? Right, so there are no further questions, which means? So this will be the format of our classes all the time. The first 10, 8, 12 minutes we will reserve for reviewing the previous lecture so that I can extract any questions from you. If not, then we will start our main lecture for that day. Right, so for today's class, the learning objectives are very simple, these two. Number one, how organic compounds are classified in different groups and families. That's how we can look at the classification of organic compounds. So now we have some idea that how they are distributed, and we can study them according to their different classification. Right? Number second criteria or the learning objective for today's lecture is to study the structural, physical, and chemical properties of alkanes. So from this lecture onward, we will have, I think, 3 or 4 more lectures where we will talk about one of these classes. So alkanes, if you don't know already, is one class of organic compounds. And whenever we will study a specific class of organic compounds, these are the 3 things which we will be studying in those classes. Structural, physical, and chemical properties of those things. Right? So chemical properties meaning that how they can be synthesized, for example, or what type of reaction they do. What will be their chemical properties. Physical properties would mean probably their boiling point, their melting point, their appearance, something like that. Alright? And then the structural properties are also very important because that will tell us about the structure of those compounds. So that's what we will see in some of our next few lectures, that different classes of compounds may have different structural features. It's not that if the compound is based on carbon, then all of their structures will be same. So that's what we will see. So the structural classification of organic compounds could be based on various different factors. And one of those factors is how do they look like, right? So how does a compound look like? How can we tell if we don't know? So this is my question to you. Some brainstorming maybe. Let's suppose that you have isolated or found a new compound from any experiments that you were doing, right? Now you don't know what is the structure of that compound, right? Because we don't have the eye to look at bonds, correct? How do we actually determine the structure of any given compound? That's my question. Because this all classification will come later. If we know the structure, then we can classify them according to their structures. But how do we find the structures of any new compounds or any unknown compounds? For example, water, right? How did we get the formula for water? Somebody is saying something, but I can't hear. There's no wrong answer, so yeah, whatever you think. How do you think that chemists determine the structure of a compound? Or do they read books and then they find that, well, this is the structure? So how does it come in the books? Yes?
Could it be like from the properties of the chemical? Like cyclocarbons, like carbon hydrogen, they have like very specific properties that are unique to them and them alone. So if you can do a test for the cyclocarbon hydrogens, you can tell that there's a cyclocarbon.
That's very good. Yes, that is one way to do it. That you can take the unknown compound and do different reactions with it. And then you can categorize that, well, this compound does reaction like that compound. So they may have similar structural characteristics. So this is called qualitative determination of structure. Back in the days when there were no advanced machineries or structure determining tools, the chemical properties were used to tell the structures of compounds, or at least to differentiate them in different classes. For example, people would know that if a compound is acidic or basic based on how do they react with their counterparts, right? So yes, chemists or scientists, they do different types of tests to categorize the compounds in different classes. That's one way to do it. But in modern days, sometimes you might not need to do it, and then there are a lot of instruments which can take you to the structures one step after the other step. And those characterization tools are called spectroscopic analysis of structure. So spectroscopy is the type of instrumentation which can give you a particular detail about the structural feature of any unknown compound. So one type of spectroscopy can give you the molecular weight of compound, for example. Another type of spectroscopy could give you how many hydrogens are there and how many carbons are there. Another type of spectroscopy could give you that if there are any double bonds in the compounds or not. So all these different types of instruments which are based on spectroscopic analysis, that's what scientists do to get the structure of the given compound or a known compound. Yeah, but for your level, at the level of this class, where we are not going to actually perform the spectroscopic analysis, of course, qualitative analysis is one of the way by which you can segregate compounds in different classes. Yeah? So this brings me to the structural classification of organic compounds. So simply speaking, organic compounds could be open chain or they can be cyclic or closed chain, right? Then within closed chain, we can have heterocyclic compounds or homocyclic compounds. And remember that I mentioned this somewhere in our last lecture that hetero generally means what is not carbon and hydrogen in organic compounds. So if there are other atoms involved, meaning nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, and those other elements, then the compound could be called heteromolecule. If it only has carbon and hydrogen, then it's called either homocyclic compound or simply hydrocarbon compound, because it only has hydrogen and carbon, hence the name hydrocarbon. Right? Then within heterocyclic compounds we can have two classes, aromatic compounds or alicyclic compounds. Now alicyclic compounds are somewhat simpler, this is what I can say at the moment, while aromatic compounds have further classification, further characteristics, which are not part of this lecture at any point today, but now that we are talking about it, so they would somehow look like this structure. And this compound is called benzene, so benzene oil is a class of compound which very well represents aromatic compounds. While the compounds which are not quite simpler in their cyclic structure, they have some sort of similarity with this, but they are not exactly same like that, then they are generally called non-benzene oil. Okay, so this classification is only based on what feature? How do they look like in their structural form? Right, and the main classification is actually simply the heterocyclic compounds, homocyclic compounds, alicyclic compounds, and then aromatic compounds. If they are cyclic, of course. If they are not cyclic, then simply open chain structures. Right? Clear, right? Any questions here? Yes.
What does heterocyclic mean exactly?
That simply means, as the name suggests, that cyclic compounds which also have other atoms. Not all atoms are hydrogen and carbon. So this is a cyclic compound, okay? But then we have one sulfur in this cyclic structure. So that's why heterocyclic. While in other cases, all the ring is made up of carbons. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Any question from here? Because the next classification will be a bit more tricky. I'm just kidding. That would be easy as well. So the most important classification for organic compound is based on their functional group. So what is a functional group? The definition is just there. That a functional group can be termed as an atom or a group of atoms in a molecule that causes distinctive properties to that compound. So as the name suggests, that this changes the functionality of the given compound. And when we say functionality, it means their physical and chemical both properties. Right? So these are so many different types of functional groups that you might need to memorize a little bit. So the important part within that functional group is highlighted in blue color, right? So for example, this compound is called alkane. Why this is called alkane? Because it only has carbon-carbon single bond. Then this compound is called an alkene. Why? Because this carbon-carbon double bond is a different functional group. And this functional group carrying compounds are called alkenes. Right? And how do we tell? Based on this blue color representation. So this part is actually the functional group in this compound. Then we have carbon-carbon triple bond. So the compounds which bear carbon-carbon triple bond are called alkynes. Right? So there's no other way to remember them instead of just using your memory. I can tell you at least which one you must remember. And then the others probably you can ignore. Right? So yeah, the first three, of course, you need to remember. Any compound which contains halogen compound or halogen element like chlorine, fluorine, bromine, iodine, they would be called halogens or alkyl halides. Or halides to be fair, because it could be an aryl halide as well, an alkyl halide as well, an alkenyl halide as well. But as long as it has a halogen atom, meaning chlorine, fluorine, bromine, and iodine, those will be called halide functional groups. Then we have oxygen containing compounds. So yes, alcohol is very important. You need to remember that in a compound, when OH group is present, then they would be called alcohol family. But when OH group is attached to benzene ring, then it's not alcohol anymore. It's called phenol. Yeah. So this one and this one, they have same functional group atoms, right? OH here and OH here. But since this OH is attached to an open chain carbon, so these are called alcohols. While the same OH, when it's attached to the aromatic ring, then it's called phenol. Right? So very important, aldehyde very important, ketone very important, carboxylic acid very important. So these three, actually these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, these 5 are somewhat similar to each other because all of them contain this carbon double bond oxygen. Right? This carbon double bond oxygen is actually called carbonyl group. This one I'm talking about. So this has a carbonyl, this has a carbonyl, this has a carbonyl, this has a carbonyl, and this also has a carbonyl. But besides carbonyl, what is present? We have one hydrogen there. So this group is called aldehyde. We have another carbon on both sides of the carbonyl. So this group is called ketone. Are you able to see what I'm showing you? So this carbonyl has one carbon on one side and then OH group on the other side. So this is called carboxylic acid. I'm sure that you have heard these names before, but if you haven't, then please take some time to probably memorize some of these, the ones which we are discussing right now. You see that I have conveniently ignored some of them. For example, ether. Ether is important, but not that much, and then you can learn about it later as well. Esters and amides are actually carboxylic acid derivatives, so they come in the same class. And then we will have a separate chapter about their derivatives, so you can learn about them later as well. So just remember carbonyl, alcohol, halogens, and amines. Amines are also quite important because not many compounds actually have nitrogen as part of their functional group. So amines have NH2 group attached to the carbon chain. They are called amines. And they are very good example of organic bases. While here, as the name suggests, carboxylic acid, so they are acidic compound. So when we talk about organic acids, we are generally talking about carboxylic acid, or in some cases phenols as well. So phenols are also somewhat acidic. But let's not go into a lot of their details because, as I said, that we will cover these classes in their respective lectures. Right? So do you know what to do on this slide? Please memorize some of these functional groups so that you don't have a tough time when we study about them. While for today's lecture, in the later part, what we will cover today is only alkane. So alkanes are simple hydrocarbon compounds where carbon and carbon are attached with each other by a single covalent bond. So this is the actual definition of alkane compounds, yeah? Alright, so besides functional group, probably we can look at their physical properties to get the idea that what difference does it make. I mean, all these functional groups, why they are so different and we have categorized them into different families is based on the properties of the compounds which carry some of these functional groups. So in this table, we see that all these compounds have 4 carbons, right? But based on their different functional groups, their physical properties are drastically different from each other. And same can be said about their chemical properties. So that's why they make all the difference in the properties of the compounds which belong to some of these families. So you can tell that when we have butane, meaning that this molecule's name is butane, we don't know it yet, we don't need to memorize it yet, but that's there, the name is there. But you could easily tell that this structure is different than this structure. And what is the difference? That here we only have carbon and hydrogens, and here we have this functional group, OH. And then you can see the drastic change in their physical properties. Right? And it goes without saying that their chemical properties would also be very, very different from each other. So that's why it's super important to know these functional groups. Right? Okay, so far we have looked at two types of classification, right? First one was about structure, and then second one was about functional group. We can categorize organic compound in different ways, and one of the ways is called biological classification. Here we can categorize them in two main classes, which are primary metabolites and secondary metabolites. So primary metabolites are these compounds which you already know, for example, proteins, for example, carbohydrates, for example, DNA, RNA, and phospholipids. So these are the compounds which are essential for the physiological function of living organisms. That's why they are called primary metabolites. While others might not be directly involved in the physiological function, but they may be involved in other functions, right? They may not cause life or death to the living organism, but then they are essential to protect them, for example. Or they may be useful in the reproduction of that living organism. So some of them are listed here, such as terpenes, such as alkaloids, such as fatty acids, steroids, and so on and so forth. So these are called secondary metabolites because they are either derived from the primary metabolites or they are synthesized in different mechanism of the living organisms that we are discussing about. So if you talk about human or plants or bacteria or other animals, these categories stand. Some of the metabolites are primary metabolites, which are proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids mainly, and then DNA, RNA, of course. While some of the other biological compounds, which may be useful for other functions, but are not essential for the life and death matters of those living organisms, are simply called secondary metabolites. Okay? Any confusion so far? Or any questions? How about the online fellas? Do you have any questions? No. Spectroscopy, yes. Chongji, spectroscopy is the technique by which we can study the structure of a given compound. Can we use different NMR, Isabel, that's very spot on. NMR is one of the spectroscopic techniques by which we can tell how many carbons and how many hydrogens are there. Right, so who's up for a quick break maybe? Alright then. Let's resume in 3 minutes. Or, yeah, I think 2 is fine. Anson here. Is Anson here? Oh, okay. What about sashimi? No? And what about Biochemistry? Are you here? Okay. Oh, Biochemistry. Thank you. Right, so there's only one absence today. I feel really sad for it. Sashimi. Sashimi. All right. All right. Time's up. Let's talk about alkanes now. The classification part is done, so the rest of the lecture will be totally about alkanes. So what are alkanes? Alkanes come from a broader family of compounds which are called hydrocarbons. And hydrocarbons, as the name suggests, are the organic compounds in which we only have two elements, which are carbon and hydrogen, right? So there could be different types of hydrocarbons, for example, as given here in this table, that a hydrocarbon could be either alkane, or alkene, or alkyne, or aromatic compound. And this all depends on what type of bonding is present here. So in alkane, we only have carbon-carbon single bonds, while in alkene, we have carbon-carbon double bond. In alkynes, we have carbon-carbon triple bond, and in aromatic compounds, we have this specialized structure called benzene. Right? So since today's lecture is about alkanes, we will talk about other classes later. So what are alkanes? So alkanes have a general formula which is represented as CnH2n plus 2, meaning that you can put any number as n and then you will know the exact molecular formula of that many carbons alkane using this equation, right? So they are found in almost everything, such as natural gases, petroleum, all these small organic compounds. They are generally from alkane classes. Smaller alkanes generally have very low boiling point, therefore they are gases, while alkanes starting from number 4 and 5, they start to be liquid, and then we will see their physical properties in a short while. So before we get into the details of their chemical and physical properties, first thing first is how do we define or how do we tell that what are the structures of alkane compounds? Yeah? So to tell the structure of any given compound, there are different structural theories, which are mainly not the topic of our course here, but since we need some explanation of their structure, so these two are the theories which I personally like a lot. So you will see some examples of them in every lecture. One is called molecular orbital theory, another is called valence bond theory. As I said, there are like probably hundreds of other structural theories there in the world. But we don't need to go in a lot of details of these theories, as long as we can explain some principle behind the thought of the structure of these compounds, we are good to go. So first theory by which we can explain the structure of alkane is from molecular orbital theory. So what we do in molecular orbital theory is that we draw all the orbits and orbitals based on their electronic energy states, right? And then we draw the valence orbitals of the atoms which are making a new bond. So in this case it will be carbon and hydrogen. And the simplest alkane we can get is for the compound which only has one hydrogen. So if we use the equation that we had just now, what would be the formula of most simplest alkane? How? Using that equation, right? CnH2n plus 2. So if you put n as 1 and you solve that, then you will get CH4. So that is the most simplest alkane compound in the world. And here we are looking at this example. Because why not? The simpler is better, right? But you can apply the same rules on any given alkane and you will have the same structure. So how does it work? That in molecular orbital theory we get to know that carbon has two orbitals which are 2s and 2p, and then it has one electron in each of them. While 2s orbital is lower in energy, that's why it's drawn at the lower part of the paper, and then carbon has higher energy because 2p orbital is higher in energy from 2s orbital, so it is drawn a bit at height, right? But in hydrogens, which are 4 in this case, we have only 1s orbital, and all of 1s orbital will have same energy because they are same orbitals, right? So all of them are drawn at one straight line. You see the difference, right? That these two are drawn in two different planes, and then this is drawn all in one plane because of their difference in energy. So molecular orbital theory tells that these unhybridized orbitals, they will mix up with each other and they will make as many hybrid molecular orbitals. Right, so altogether 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 4 and 4, 8. So we have here 8 new molecular orbitals with different energy, which is neither same as them or them, because these are new molecular orbitals. But they also have this grading in their energy, that the sigma orbital is the lowest, then we have more sigmas, and then we have sigma star. And in cases we can also have pi orbitals, which we will see in other examples. But for alkanes, we will not have any pi orbitals, because all the bonds are carbon-carbon single bond, so we will only have sigma orbitals here. And then they will pair up in these molecular orbitals. So first one electron will come from here, one electron will come from there, this is full. Each of these orbitals can only take 2 electrons. Then the next one will have one from each, then one from each, and then one from each. So this is how we know that the structure of the simplest alkane has 4 sigma molecular orbitals, which simply dictates that it will have 4 bonds. And those bonds will be sigma bonds. And sigma bonds actually mean covalent bonds. Right? This is it. We don't need to go into further details on it. Yes, question?
What is a sigma star bond?
They are anti-bonding empty orbitals at the moment. Anti-bonding, empty as of no electrons in them. They could be used in some cases when we have more electrons. Right? Any other questions? So this is just one way of telling the structure. So by this explanation which we discussed just now, what are we able to tell? That it will have 4 sigma bonds. That's all. Right? While the other favorite theory is called valence bond theory, which tells that all the orbitals again, they will mix with each other and they will make as many hybrid orbitals. And then those hybrid orbitals will already form a structural representation in space, meaning that those hybrid orbitals need to be away from each other as much as possible. So when you have 4 petals of a thing, the further they can go away from each other is the structure called tetrahedron. Right? The tetrahedron meaning that the petals of that structure will be away from each other by 110 degrees. That's about it. So if you keep them away 110 degrees from each other and then use all the space around them, then you will have a tetrahedral structure. So this is how a tetrahedral structure looks like. The first, this is called sp3 hybridization for the reason that only one s orbital from the carbon is used, and then the 3 p orbitals are being combined to give you these 4 sp3 hybrid orbitals. sp3, as the name suggests, has 4 orbitals, right? 3p and 1s. So that's why we have these 4 petals. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the number of orbitals which are combining with each other will always be equal to the number of orbitals that we get at the end of each of these theories. Same was the case in molecular orbital theory, and same thing happens here. So in some cases, the orbitals of carbon will have sp3 hybridization, in some cases they will have sp2, and in some cases they will have different hybridization. So for alkanes, the valence bond theory tells that they will have sp3 hybridization. And sp3 hybridization means that they will have these 4 petals, and that means that they will be away from each other, having nearly about 110 degrees from each other. Now these hybrid orbitals can overlap with the s orbital of the hydrogen, which needs to make bond with the carbon, right? So all these colorful orbitals are for carbon, and then these white circles are for hydrogen s orbital. By the way, do you know the shapes of orbitals in general? Right, so s orbital is actually a sphere, and then the p orbitals are dumbbell shaped, and then the d orbital is double dumbbell or something, just like that. So these new petals or shapes, they are coming after the orbitals are mixed up with each other. And those orbitals were, of course, s orbital was sphere, and then the p orbital were the dumbbell shape. And then after hybridization, they look like these petals. Right? Finally, the hydrogen is overlapped with them, and then a new bond is formed, and that's about it. So this tells us about the structure of alkane, that it will be tetrahedral. Why tetrahedral? Because these 4 orbitals, new hybrid orbitals, need to be away from each other as much as possible. And if you have 4 things, this is how they can be away from each other, in the shape of a tetrahedron. Right? Does it make sense? Or are there any questions? Yeah, forget about molecular orbital theory or valence bond theory. If you can understand and picturize this much, that carbon has 4 orbitals, and then it is making 4 new bonds. Now these bonds must be as much away from each other as possible. Then we are good to go. Because that's how they are making a tetrahedral structure. Okay? I don't see very convincing knots. I only see confusing knots, like something like that. If you don't understand anything, how would I know if you don't ask me questions? Come on. No question is silly question. This is theory, so there is no practical proof of these things. So no visualizing. I get your point that can we do this experimentally to tell that how exactly the orbitals are. So these are all the electronic clouds we are talking about.
Previous one, the MOT, I don't really get it at all.
Do you get this point that after mixing of orbitals we can have newer orbitals? This is it for you to know. Each of these is a different thesis topic. Molecular orbital theory is very complex. It requires the information about quantum physics and so many different things. So we don't need to go into the details of these things. But as long as you know that 4 plus 4 orbitals are getting mixed, and then these many orbitals are being formed, and some of them will have lower energy, some of them will have higher energy, of course, why not, right? And some of them will have different capacity, some of them will have different capacity, and then electrons will always go in the orbitals which have lower energy. So this is the reason that this is drawn as the lowest part of the paper, right? So first electrons will go here, then here, then here, then here, and then they will be here like this. 1, 2, 3. That's it. Yes. No. Let me leave them. If you forget about the shapes, that's fine. But you need to know the structural shape of these clouds. Not about the orbitals. That is quite basic. And we tend to forget basic things all the time. Right? But now we have established that the structure of alkane is tetrahedron. So this is a key information. You cannot not remember this. You have to memorize to the core of your brain. You can have multiple questions from this information. Those could be MCQs, those could be short questions as well, right? For example, this could be a very well question in your exam that explain the structure of alkane using your favorite theory. So you could use valence bond theory explanation or molecular orbital theory explanation or any other theory explanation, as long as you explain that how did this structure came into being, you will be good to go. Right? And that's what I attempted now as well, right? That we didn't go in much details of these theories, but then we did tell that yeah, hybridization is a process in which orbitals are overlapping with each other and then forming new orbitals. Yes?
When it says 3p orbitals, do you mean the suborbitals like TS, T, Y, P, Z, or do you mean like different P's?
Yeah, absolutely. The suborbitals. Because we are talking about the carbon here, right? So those 3p orbitals are the suborbitals that we are talking about. Yeah? Okay? Right, so this is how it translates into real world. So the structure of alkane is a tetrahedron, so 109.5 to be exact. And this is how it will look like in real life. And this is how it is drawn on a piece of paper. So here you can observe two things. First thing is this bond, which is solid, and it's drawn in a different shape than a normal bond, right? This is a bond that you will be familiar with already. Then a line. A line represents a single covalent bond, right? So this is also one line, but it's drawn in a shape of a wedge, right? And this wedge is different from this wedge. This is also a wedge, right? But this is a dotted wedge, and this is a solid wedge. So we use this type of representation to tell that if this bond is out of the plane or inside the plane. So a wedge would mean that this bond is not on the plane. So this is a plane, right, where we have drawn the structures. But can we draw a tetrahedron on a 2D plane? We can't. So this is how we tell that this bond is actually out of the plane and this bond is actually behind the plane or inside the plane. Does this make sense? If this makes sense, you will do good in stereochemistry, which will be a topic for us in the next few lectures. But if you don't get this, then good luck to you. So do you able to tell this that we cannot make 3D structure on a 2D plane? And this board and this sheet is actually 2D. So how do we represent the 3D part of the structure is by using this type of drawing. So a wedge bond would mean either inside the plane or outside the plane. And a solid wedge would mean outside the plane, that's towards you. And a dotted wedge would mean inside the plane, meaning away from it. While the other two bonds might as well be on the same plane. We don't mind that. Right? Perfect. Right. Right, so here is the formula and the common names of some of the alkanes. Now this is again new memory. I am so sorry, but these are the names which you might have to memorize. So like number 1 is number 1 in English and satu in Malay. And then something else in Chinese. What's 1 in Chinese? E. Okay, perfect. So in organic chemistry, 1 is met. Right? And then 2 is et. And then so on and so forth. So this is just a language. There's no other way to remember them. You have to memorize. So 1 is met, et, and then prop, then built, blah 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 blah. And then the last part is actually from the class. So we are studying alkane, so you will see the same suffix in every name. Right? So methane, ethane, and then so on and so forth. Right? So I'm sure that you are familiar with these names before this class as well, right? So how much is 25? Can someone tell me how will we say 25 in we will never see 25 in real world, but I'm just asking that what's your base of the knowledge? You have something to do with your deck because the deck pen. Yeah, but I get the idea that you know about this, right? So please do not mix this up because we are going to start nomenclature from the next level, right? Do you need time to remember them? Right, I will probably give you 1 minute. Just 1 to 10. Just try to memorize 1 to 10. How are you able to read this? Icosane. Okay, you're right. Right, so just 1 to 10 would do for now. Methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, hexane, heptane, octane, nonane, and decane. Right. Let's also take some time to look at their formula. Formula you can tell by using the same equation, CnH2n plus 2. So just keep increasing the number of carbons and then you will have the formula. Right, their boiling point, melting point, this is just for show that they are different from each other. Of course, you are not supposed to know the physical properties of any given compound except for water, I think. You would know the freezing point of water is something and then boiling point is something, right? But besides that, we can't really memorize this. But you can appreciate that as the number of carbon is increasing, the boiling point is also increasing, right? And the melting point is also increasing. And the density is also increasing. So this will be the general trend in all the classes of compounds. Right? Right, so here is another example. Butane is an alkane compound. The formula is C4H10. Then we can have 2 types of butanes. One could be normal butane and the other could be isobutane. So normal butane would be the one where we don't have any branching, all the carbons are in straight chain, while isobutane would be the compound in which we have 1 branch. So iso will be generally where we'll have 1 branch. And then we will see that in other cases we may as well have 2 branches. Yeah, so this is an example of constitutional isomers. which is very much possible in butane. In pentane also we can have multiple constitutional isomers. So we can have normal pentane, which is represented as small n in pentane. Then isopentane. Iso again comes from one branch, so it only has one branch, right? While neo comes from two branches, right? So a chain of three. If you look at this way or that way, it doesn't make any difference. But whichever way you look at it, you will always have two branches. So that's why this is called neo. Right? Right, now basic boring stuff. The IUPAC rules for nomenclature. We will not do a lot of practice here in the class because that we will cover in our tutorial. By the way, tutorials and practicals start from next week, so I'll see you there as well. But let's look at a few examples and then we can, go ahead with that. So these are the rules. I will leave them for you to read out probably. Right? Okay, so if there is someone in this class who has never studied IUPAC nomenclature, please raise their hand. I am raising my hand as I have also not studied them before. Perfect, so I have many friends here. Right, well, most of you have studied, but never mind, we are learning it now. So please, any questions, just stop me. So I am giving you this opportunity to read these 4 rules. Let's take probably 1 minute. In the meantime, let me probably see if there are any questions from the online fellows. The orbitals are stacked into each other, but the electrons will first be in the lower orbital. That's perfect, Shonji. Yes. And when they are at same level, then first electrons will be unpaired. They will not like to be paired. As per Hund's rule. Right, so 1 minute up. What is the summary of these rules? That first thing first, that you need to identify the longest continuous chain. Right? After that, you will probably give hypothetical numbering to that chain, and the numbering should start from the end where the branch gets the least number. This is very hypothetical, so you might need to do it multiple times to see that which side is giving least number to the first branch. And then finally put the name of the branches followed up by the name of the chain. And the names will come from the table which we saw earlier, like methane, ethane, butane, propane. And that's it. Write the alkyl group in alphabetical order regardless of their position. This is also important. So if it has multiple branches, the name of branches should be given alphabetical order when you are writing the name. So let's look at this example. This is a given compound. Now this green box suggests that this is the longest continuous chain, right? And then the numbering must be given from this side, because if we give it from that side, then this branch will get number 4. And if we are giving the numbering from this side, then the branch is getting number 3. So this is how you can tell that this way is correct and that way would be wrong. So this will take some trial and error, and then you would be able to do it very easily. And I assure you that we will do enough practice of the nomenclature in our tutorial section as well. Yeah? Right. More examples. Why this is wrong and this is right? Because we have 7 carbon chain, but only 3 substituents. While if we choose this as the longest chain, then we have 7 carbon chain and 4 substituents. So this is also something you need to be careful about, that not only the length of the chain is important, but how many branches are there on the chain as well. So this chain of length is 7 and this chain of length is also 7, but this would be correct and this would be incorrect based on that this one has 4 groupings and this one has only 3 groupings. Right? So does this example make sense? Perfect. Alright, so numbering the main chain, number the longest chain beginning at the end of the chain nearest a substituent, perfect. So this would be incorrect because this one gets number 3, while this would be correct because this one gets number 2. And then similar groups can be written together using the di, tri, tetra kind of prefixes. So it has 1, 2, 3 methyl groups, right? So these all can be written together as 2, 4, 5 trimethyl. And then numbers must be separated from each other using comma, and then the numbers and alphabets must be separated from each other using hyphen. Right? You see hyphen here because number and alphabets. And you see comma here because number and numbers. Okay? Right. So these are some of the common branches you will see in alkyl compounds and in all different compounds. 1 carbon branching is called methyl group. Then 2 carbon in straight line is called ethyl group. Then you have propyl group. Propyl group could be of 2 types. If all are in same line, then N-propyl. And if we have 1 branch there, then it will be called isopropyl. Right? And then 4 carbons can have 4 types: normal butyl, isobutyl, secondary butyl, and tertiary butyl. So normal you have seen before already because everything is in 1 line. Tertiary butyl you have seen before in example of neopentane, right? So what is the difference between isobutyl and secondary butyl is the position of the branching. So in isobutyl, the branch is at the second last carbon, while in secondary butyl, the branch is on the third last. Or from the carbon where the main chain is attached. So this dash represents that the main chain is attached here. So in secondary butyl, we have branch on the same carbon which is attached to the main chain. This is the branch, right? And then this dash represents that this carbon is actually attached to the main chain. While in case of isobutyl, this is the carbon which is attached to the main chain as represented by this dash, but then the branch is not presented on that carbon. It is presented on the next carbon. That's why this is called isobutyl group and this is called secondary butyl group. Are you able to see these differences? So this dash represents that where the branch is attached to the main chain. So this is where the main chain is present. And then you know this from the neo example that there's no confusion here. It has 2 branches, it will also be called neo if we only have 5 carbons. But if we have more carbons, then we cannot call it neo anymore. We have to call it tertiary butyl group. Right? Because the 5th carbon is part of the main chain. It's not part of this group. That's why it's called tertiary butyl. While this is called secondary butyl and this is called isobutyl. Is this clear, class? Any confusion? Now would be perfect time to ask. All good? All right then. Right, so more examples. Easy peasy, right? This is the longest chain and the numbering would go like that. We have 2-methyl and 4-ethyl, but we will write 4-ethyl first because we need to write them in alphabetical order. Correct? So the name would be 4-ethyl 2-methyl hexane. If you write in exam 2-methyl and 4-ethyl, you might not get points for that. Although it's a silly mistake, right? But then it does not follow the rules as suggested by IUPAC. Okay? So you need to follow the alphabetical order in terms of these type of examples. While let me tell you this clearly, this is our first class where we are looking at IUPAC nomenclature, right? So you will definitely have questions in your exam about IUPAC. Okay? So we will do practice in our tutorial section, and then the slides are there as well. So anything if you don't understand, you can ask me now or in the next lecture, or on WhatsApp group, or by email consultation, or wherever you see me. Right? But please do not ignore this, that this topic would be in your exam. Right, so we have seen this previously. If you have multiple same groups, then you can combine them using the prefixes like di, tri, and tetra. So we have 3 methyl groups here at position 2, 5, and 7. So the name would go like 257 trimethyl DK. Alright? So I think let's take a quick break. 5 minutes. Okay? Because we are starting a whole new topic from next lesson. Let's take 4 minutes then. We'll resume at 6:20. Yes. Anything here?
Because the shape, I think that's the trajectory. Like dumbbell is like the trajectory. Orbital just like orbital like a same direction. Outside the orbital yeah. But why is it? S is the low energy one.
What happens when we have
Shape of electrons.
Why electron science?
So it's more than
Honestly, I didn't know like
That's what we
it's actually that one doesn't
Right, so let's resume.
It's just a simplified version. But the one we're working now is the
Alright, so let's briefly look at the let's quickly look at some of the physical properties of alkanes. We will not go again in a lot of details of other physical properties. Probably for all the classes, we will look at their boiling point and melting point. That's what, or density in some cases. But mainly, in some cases, we'll only go into one of these, the details for one of these, either the melting point or boiling point. But for alkanes, we will look at their boiling points and melting points. So generally, what we saw from the table as well, that as the number of carbon increases, their melting or boiling point will also increase. And this makes sense, right? Because carbon comes from coal. The main source of carbon compounds is still coal. And then if you have more coal, it will burn later. More coal will take higher energy to be burned. And then the compounds which will have higher percentage of carbon will be burning differently. That is actually one of the tests by which we can tell if a compound is aromatic or non-aromatic. If you burn that compound, and if we see black fumes coming out from there, that would tell that this has more carbon than other carbons. And aromatic compounds actually have higher percentage of carbon as opposed to hydrogen. We're not going through further detail of that because that's what we will do in our practical work. But what I'm trying to say here is that the number of carbon directly represents if the melting point or boiling point of the compound would be higher or lower. But within each of them, we can have some variations. The variations which I'm trying to show here from the graph is, so normal alkanes actually have higher boiling point than isoalkane. And the reason for this is the packing of the molecules in their actual structure. So imagine that if molecule has a rope-like structure, or if it has some hooks on that rope. So which of the ropes will be packed easily? The one with the hooks or the one without the hooks? There is a 50-50 chances that whatever you will say will be the right answer. Right? So there are two ropes, and then you are trying to put them in a coil. Right? So the two ropes which don't have any hooks on them will be done easily put in a coil, right? Because there are no hooks, there are no problems. Both the ropes could be tied on each other and they can be put in a coil easily. But if some of them do have hooks on them, then those hooks needs to be aligned to be put in the coil, right? So similarly, normal alkanes whose structure will be just like ropes because they don't have any branches can be stacked on each other. While if they do have branches, then that stacking will be hindered by that branching, right? They can come close to each other if those branches are actually aligned with each other. And then since we can't see those branches with our naked eyes, then the chances are that their structure will not be tightly packed with each other as opposed to normal alkane. That's why due to the tight packing of the structure of normal alkanes, their boiling point are lower or higher. Are actually higher, sorry, because of higher symmetry. They will be tightly packed, so the boiling point will be higher. And the iso compounds which have the branches in them, because iso, as the name suggests, has the branches, they will not be tightly packed with each other. There will be always some misalignment with those branches, and that's why the structure will not be tightly packed, and their boiling point would be somewhat lower than the normal. This is what I'm trying to show you. While the graph tells you self-explanatory that the number of carbon as it increases, the boiling point keeps increasing, right? Same is the case for melting point, but there is a different anomaly there. In melting point, again, as the number of carbon increases, the melting point increases. By the way, melting point will come into place for the alkanes which are solid. And then boiling point will come in place for the alkanes which are liquids, right? But then here, in the case of melting points, what we observe from the data is this, that even number of molecules actually have, even number of carbon containing molecules will have slightly higher melting point than odd number of carbon containing molecules. And the reason again here is symmetry, because the even number would be stacked on even number nicely. And then the odd number will have not the middle carbon in them. So with the even number chain, you can divide the molecule in two equal parts, hypothetically speaking. But for odd number, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? So even number molecules will have higher symmetry, and the difference is not that much, but then since it's there in the data, this is how it's explained. It's all based on the symmetry of the even number of carbon containing molecules. Does it make sense? You can find the middle carbon of the even number containing chain. But for odd number containing carbon, you wouldn't be able to identify the middle bond, right? So imagine them as ropes, and then if they are in even number of centimeters, then you would be easily packing them all together on one top of each other. But if there is one even and one odd, then there will always be some misalignment at the edges of the structure, right? So that's what the authors are trying to say. Anyway, the difference is not that small, it's not that huge anyway, right? In this case, as well as in the previous case. You see, only this much of a difference. Probably like 5 degrees or so. Their bond angle is not deviating from their ideal bond angle, right? Some of their physical properties, again, number of carbon dictates their boiling point and their melting points. If you compare them with the open chain alkanes, so they are less reactive because they don't have that corner carbon anymore. Every carbon is same like the other carbon because they are making a ring, right? So every carbon is same as the other carbon. While in terms of open chain structure, the corner carbons are somewhat different. That's the no carbon in between. These two are on the neighboring carbons from each other, right? While in this case we have two possibilities. We could have given number 1 to this carbon, or we could have given number 3 to this carbon. So So why are we giving number 1 to this carbon? Because it has more branches. Right? So this would be 3-ethyl 1,1-dimethyl cyclohexane. Correct? Right, so sometimes it happens that cycloalkanes also have some important functional group in them. Like at their branches, they may have some functional groups. Or a chain of open chain carbons which could not be given name as a branch itself. So in that case, the cyclic part becomes a branch, and then the chain part takes the main name. What do I mean by that? So for example, in here, there is no problem. We can call this compound methyl cyclopentane. We can call this compound tertiary butyl cycloheptane, because this branch in itself can be named as a group. Right? But what about this branch? Now this branch does not have a common name at all. So in this case, we will treat this part as the main chain, and we will treat this cycloalkane group as a branch. So the name would be, even though we are writing cyclohexane, but you see that we are giving numbering to this branch part and not to the ring part. So you see 1, 2, dimethyl propyl, because 3, and then cyclohexane is written just as we will write a branch name. Does it make sense? Why we are making this tweak here? Because this branch in itself cannot be named as a one group, because it has 2 branches at 2 different carbons, so it does not have a common name at all. So this means we have to give priority to this open chain part of the molecule in numbering, and that's why we have done exactly that. And then why we start numbering from this carbon and not from this carbon? Because if we started the numbering from this carbon, the first branch will get number 2. And if we start numbering from this carbon, the first branch will get number 1. So the other rules still stand, that you need to start numbering from the end, where the branch gets the least number. Right? Probably when we will look at more examples, you will get it more easily. Right, so beside that, beside the numbering and the positioning, the orientation of the groups also matters in cyclic compounds. So cyclic compounds are again example of geometric isomers. So the groups which are present on a cyclic compound might be on the same side of the plane or at the opposite side of the plane. So they will make them 2 different stereoisomers. So you see here that the 2-methyl group on this cyclohexane are both written with a solid wedge bond. And what does a solid wedge bond mean? Out of the plane. So both of them are out of the plane, meaning that both of them are on the same side. So that's why this is a cis isomer. And in this case, the 2 groups, they may be same groups or they may be different groups. It doesn't make a difference. But their orientation makes a difference in making them cis or trans isomers. So it will be called cis when both groups are on the same side, and it will be called trans when both groups are on the opposite side. Yes?
Did you say geometric isomers refer to when there's a double bond?
That was one of the examples, that's what I said. And I said that there will be other examples as well. So this is another example in which we don't need double bonds. But the plane of ring is what is being considered here. So if you consider ring to be flat, then the groups might not be flat, because only 2 things could be on 2D plane flat, right? The other 2 things would be either inside the plane or outside the plane. So that's what's happening here. So here we are considering the ring to be flat. But then the groups which are attached on the ring, they cannot be flat because only two things could be flat on a 2D plane. Therefore, the groups could be either inside the plane or outside the plane. This makes total sense, right? And based on the orientation of these two groups, we could have cis or trans isomers in cycloalkanes. So if the groups are on the same side, then those would be called cis isomers, and if the groups are on the opposite side, just here, then they are called trans isomers, right? So while naming this compound, we have to write cis and trans with the name. So this will be called cis 1,2-dimethyl cyclohexane, and this will be called trans 1-ethyl 2-methyl cyclohexane. Right? So there is a simpler way to understand this cis and trans, and that applies especially to the cyclohexane ring. Because remember I told you that cyclohexane is actually one of the very stable cycloalkane in the family of cycloalkane. So I said 5, 6 and 7 membered rings are the one which are most stable. So cyclohexane is one of them, right? And because of its stability, this is a classic example for us to explore the cis and trans isomers in this. And to study that, the perfect model is called the different conformations of cyclohexane. So cyclohexane structure, which I drew here, just like this hexagonal ring, is not a flat ring because each of these carbon is actually tetrahedral, right? So when a carbon is tetrahedral, it means that it will only have 2 bonds on the same plane, and the other 2 bonds will be inside and outside of that plane. So because of this limitation of its structure, we can almost never imagine the structure of cyclohexane as flat. And when it's not flat, it can be best represented in one of these 2 forms. One form is called chair form, and the other form is called boat form. So let's look at the chair form first. Why are we calling it a chair form? Because it looks like a recliner chair, isn't it? You can put in your legs there, then put in your back there, and then lie there like that. Like a chair, like a recliner sofa or something. Right? So this is the plane of this chair, and then this is the axis of this plane. This is kind of an elongated chair, right? Are you able to see this as a chair? Or is it too far-fetched? Yeah? Might not be the chair that you are sitting on at the moment, but if you have a nicer massage recliner chair, I always find this to be similar looking like that. So this is the plane and the axis of the chair that we are talking about. And then here you can see. Now this bond and this bond, if you consider them to be on the plane, then this bond and this bond would be inside and outside. And then, if these 2 are on the plane, then inside outside. Then, you can look at it more clearly from this ball and stick model. Yeah? But then we might not always have the ball and stick model in our hand, so we may need to find some way by which we can easily explain, like we did for the wedge bond, right? It easily tells that which of the bond is outside the plane and which is inside the plane. So in terms of chair form, we can differentiate the groups which are present on each carbon based on their position on the axis or on the plane of the chair. That's why these 2 types of hydrogen which are present on each carbon are called differently. So the ones which are parallel to the axis are called axial, and then which are parallel to the equator or the plane are called equatorial. Right? So all these vertical bonds, this, that, are called axial bond. And then all which are aligned to the equator of the molecule or the plane of the molecule, like this. Like this is not perfectly straight, right? It's slightly skewed. Or this is skewed. This is totally skewed. 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 These are called equatorial bonds. Right? So equatorial bonds or axial bond, both of them might be, or I mean, any of them might be outside the plane or inside the plane depending on where you put them. But please try to remember this exact structure to know that what is their position in terms of stereochemistry. So you see, when you draw the chair like this, then this bond must be drawn like that, like straight down. And this bond must be drawn like that, skewed upward, not downward. Another thing which you can notice on this structure is that on each carbon, the two hydrogens, they are on opposite direction from each other. Right? So you see that if this is downward, then this is drawn upward. Beside that, one of them is axial and other one is equatorial. But their direction is also different. You see that? That hydrogen is going upward, and then this hydrogen is drawn like skewed downwards. So this tells their stereochemistry actually. But yeah, this is inside the plane, and then that is outside the plane. This would be inside the plane, this is skewed upward, right? So outside the plane. Outside the plane, upward. Downward, inside the plane. This one would be outside the plane because upward. This one is drawn, skewed downward, meaning inside the plane. So please try to remember their position and how they are placed there. That would be super ideal for you. And I will show you probably in next few slides that how you can rotate this. That will make a whole lot of cool sense. Right? So from this slide you know that why chair form is important, because technically you don't have any ring strand in this form. Everything is further away from each other. Hydrogen, you can observe that on neighboring hydrogens or neighboring carbons, the hydrogens are actually on the opposite direction. So if this one has axial downward, then this axial is upward. When this axial is downward, then that axial is upward. So totally opposite from each other. That's why there is no strain or no static hindrance. That's what chemists like to call it. Generally, no hindrance or no closeness to each other. That's why chair conformation is the best representation to explain the structure of cyclohexane. Yeah? The other form is called boat conformation. It's not very ideal, but not bad as well. And then we will see why it is also important to understand the boat conformation. We will see that in probably 2 slides later. But let me tell you that just like chair conformation, the other conformation of cyclohexane is called boat conformation. And why this is called boat conformation? Because yeah, this is more clear, right? That it looks like a boat. So in boat conformation, we only have a slight one problem, and that is called this flat pole hydrogen. Because both of them are in the same direction, right? They have some sort of steric hindrance. They interfere with each other. Their electronic cloud is closer to each other. And that's why we have some strain here. But then, why this is important? Because, okay, I can go to that slide now. Why can't I click it? Because to convert it to the other form, it needs to go through the board structure first. There's something I also want you to notice. I'll probably open it in the YouTube and one thing I want you to notice. Stop. just imagine this carbon or this group, yeah? Just keep focusing on this one. This one, where my cursor is. Oh, you can't? Just any ball. You can focus on any one ball, and then at the end you will see that its position is totally opposite of from where you started. That's the whole purpose of showing this video. Right? So getting from one chair to the other chair, the group actually reverses its overall orientation because it needs to go through the board structure first and then it can be converted into the other chair. So the chair could be of two types, right? That in one, your seat could be in one direction and the other chair would have the seat in other direction. So that's what we are trying to show you here. Right? So yeah, the vertical ones are called axial bonds because they align with the axis. And then the equator of the molecule would be the part which divides the ring into equal form. Those would be the green bonds here. So this is one type of chair, right? That what this part of chair is called? The back, right? So the back here is on the right hand side, while in the other chair, the back was on the left hand side, right? Here we have the back here. This is the back of the chair, right? And then in the other chair, the back is there. So it was on the left side earlier, and it is on the right side now. So to convert them from right backed chair to left back chair, it needs to go through both structure. That's what the animation showed you, right? And in doing so, the position of the group which is present on those edges actually is inverted, right? This is what I'm saying, that this is a right back chair and this is a left back chair. If there was a group like methyl group here, and then when it goes to boat form and reverses itself to the other type of chair, then the axial group is now converted into equatorial group. This is quite important. And why this is important? Because axial group will have this flagpole interaction, which you could see more clearly in the boat form. While equatorial groups on the same position are opposite in direction from each other. You see that these black hydrogens, where my cursor is, they are on the same carbon, right? But because they are equatorial, they are opposite in direction from each other. This one is skewing right hand side. This one is skewing out on the left hand side. While the axial bond on the same carbon are actually towards each other. So to avoid that, all groups want to retain their equatorial position. Equatorial position, in other words, is more preferred and more stable in a cyclohexane structure. So all this changing into boat and then in other form of chair is to show you this, that when the group is present in equatorial form, there is no steric hindrance. While if the group is present in axial form, there is flagpole interaction. Does it make sense? So this animation helps now or no? You want me to play it again? Now that was a right back chair to start with. Now it goes into both, and now this is left. back chair. And you see that the red one was axial, was equatorial before and became axial later. Now this is back to being equatorial again. Right? Alright, so I think I will stop here. We only have 4 minutes left. The rest of the topic we will start